On the 11th day of his silent protest, Mark watched his wife Sarah do something that shattered the last remnants of the man he thought he was. She stood in the gleaming marble expanse of their kitchen, the late morning sun catching the diamond on her finger, a stone he had worked 2 years of overtime to afford. She was on the phone with her mother, her voice a light, musical thing that he had once mistaken for kindness. But he knew its true timbre now. It was the sound of casual cruelty, the melody of dismissal. She laughed, a tinkling sound that scraped against his raw nerves. "I know, Mom," she said, turning to glance at him for a fraction of a second, her eyes holding no more warmth than a polished stone. "No, he hasn't fixed it yet. The card was declined at the salon. Can you believe it? So embarrassing. I think poor Mark is just in over his head. Don't worry, Daddy will sort it out. He always does." She then walked over to his briefcase, which he had left by the door. Without breaking her conversation, she unlatched it, rummaged inside, and pulled out his wallet. She extracted the $300 in cash he kept for emergencies and tucked it into her own purse. It was done with the effortless entitlement of someone taking what they believed was already theirs. She didn't ask. She didn't even acknowledge him. She simply took. That was the moment Mark knew this wasn't just an experiment anymore. This was an ending. Have you ever felt completely invisible in your own home? As if you were a ghost whose only purpose was to keep the lights on and the accounts full? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories about long overdue justice, make sure to like and subscribe, because this one is a slow burn with a massive explosion. The decision to begin this quiet rebellion hadn't been born from a single cataclysmic event, but from the slow, steady erosion of 1,000 tiny cuts. It had started 3 months ago, at his father-in-law's 65th birthday party. The event was held at Richard and Eleanor's palatial home, a place of soaring ceilings and cold, minimalist furniture that always made Mark feel like an intruder. Richard, a man whose success was inherited but whose arrogance was self-made, was holding court by the massive fireplace. He clapped Mark on the shoulder, his grip just a little too tight, his smile a predatory flash of white. "And here's our Mark," he'd boomed for the benefit of his assembled friends, all of them cut from the same bolt of expensive cloth. The steady hand on the tiller, good, reliable Mark, works in, what is it again, son? Finance, architecture? Something with numbers. Keeps our Sarah in the style to which he is accustomed, eh? The men around him chuckled, a low, rumbling sound of condescension. Mark, who was the founder and sole proprietor of a highly successful architectural firm specializing in sustainable urban development, a firm that had just won the prestigious Chandler Prize, simply smiled. He had long ago learned that correcting Richard was pointless. In Richard's world, if he didn't understand something, it wasn't worth understanding. Sarah had been standing nearby, sipping champagne. She'd given him a small, tight smile, a silent plea to just play along, to not rock the boat. Her smile said, "It's just Dad being Dad. Don't make a scene." But Mark saw something else in her eyes that night, a flicker of embarrassment, not for her father's boorishness, but for him, for her husband, the quiet, unassuming man who didn't fit in with their glossy world. Later that evening, her mother, Eleanor, had cornered him in the library. She was a woman who weaponized politeness, her every compliment a veiled insult. "Mark, dear," she'd said, adjusting a silk scarf around her impossibly thin neck, "we are so thrilled with the little cottage you're building for David." The little cottage was a 4,000 square foot guest house on his brother-in-law's property, a project for which Mark's firm was providing the architectural plans pro bono, a family favor. David, a man in his late 20s who had never held a job for more than 6 months, had treated Mark like a hired contractor, demanding endless revisions and complaining about timelines. "It's just so wonderful that you have a practical skill," Eleanor continued, her eyes scanning him from head to toe, lingering for a moment on his off-the-rack suit. "It's a comfort to know Sarah has someone so Dependable. The word hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. Dependable, reliable, practical. They were the words one used to describe a sturdy appliance, not a husband, not a partner. They were the words they used to diminish him, to place him in a box of their own making. The working-class boy who had married up, the provider whose only value was his paycheck. He had looked for Sarah then, needing to see a flicker of solidarity in her eyes, a sign that she was his partner in this, not just their daughter. He found her across the room, laughing with her brother David. She caught his eye, and for a moment, he thought he saw an apology. But then she just shrugged, a tiny, helpless gesture, before turning back to her brother. The message was clear. This was his burden to bear alone. He drove home in silence that night, Sarah humming along to the radio, oblivious to the storm gathering inside him. For years he had swallowed their insults, endured their condescension, all for her. He had believed his love for her was enough to build a bridge between his world and hers. But that night he realized he wasn't building a bridge. He was just paying the toll. The foundation of their marriage wasn't love or respect. It was his quiet, limitless financial support. And he began to wonder, with a cold, terrifying clarity, what would happen if the Bank of Mark suddenly closed? The catalyst, the final push, came on a Tuesday morning a month later. He was reviewing his credit card statements online, a routine he performed with meticulous care. And there it was, a single charge for $25,000. The vendor was a high-end European car dealership. He felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He knew David had been talking about wanting a new sports car. He called Sarah. "Hi, honey," he said, keeping his voice even. "I'm looking at the Amex statement. There's a charge here for $25,000 from a car dealership." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, that," she said, her tone breezy, as if discussing the price of milk. "Yes, that was the down payment for David's car. His credit isn't great, and Dad said it would be easier to just put it on our card. You don't mind, do you? You don't mind, do you? Not, I should have discussed this with you. Not, let's talk about this. Just a retroactive statement, an assumption of his compliance. He had worked a grueling 80-hour week to close the deal that had brought in the bonus that would cover this. And she had given it away for her brother's toy without a second thought. "Sarah," he said slowly, the words tasting like ash in his mouth, "that was a joint account. That was my money too." Her sigh was audible, laced with impatience. "Mark, don't be so dramatic. It's just money. We have plenty. Besides, it's for my brother. It's family." And that was it. It's just money. To her, he wasn't a partner in a marriage. He was a corporation, and she was a majority shareholder, spending the profits as she saw fit. That afternoon, he went to the bank. He didn't act out of anger. Anger was a hot, messy emotion. This was cold, calculated, and precise. He felt like an architect designing the controlled demolition of a condemned building. He opened a new set of accounts in his name only. He systematically rerouted his income, all of it, from his salary, his investment dividends, and the substantial profits from his firm, into these new, invisible accounts. He left the joint checking account with just enough to cover the mortgage for one more month. He left the joint savings account with a few $1,000s. Then he went home, and for the next 30 days, he began the process of becoming a ghost in his own financial life. He set all the automatic payments for their shared luxuries, the country club, the wine subscription, the lease on her luxury SUV, the half-dozen streaming services she used, the credit cards she used for daily shopping, to draw from the rapidly depleting joint account. He knew exactly when each one would hit. He had a schedule, a timeline for the collapse. He was a patient man. He had been patient for 7 years. He could be patient for 30 more days. The first few days were silent, the calm before the storm. Mark went about his routine with a quiet, unnerving precision. He went to the gym in the morning, went to his office, The little side hustle that actually employed 15 people and managed multi-million-dollar projects across the country, and came home at exactly 6:30. He made dinner, as he often did, because Sarah found cooking to be a chore. He would ask about her day, and she would recount her lunch with friends, her shopping trips, her salon appointments. She didn't notice the change in him because she had never truly looked at him in the first place. She saw the function he performed, not the man he was. He watched her, a scientist observing a specimen. He noticed how she never said, "Thank you." Not for the meal he cooked, not for the dry cleaning he picked up, not for the life he provided. These things were not gifts, they were expectations. They were simply the services for which she had contracted him when she said, "I do." On day 5, the first tremor hit. A notification on her phone. "Netflix couldn't process your payment," she announced to the room, annoyed. "Mark, can you look into that? The Wi-Fi has been spotty too." She didn't look up from her tablet. "I'll check it," he said, his voice a calm sea over a trench of churning emotion. He did nothing. 2 days later, her favorite meal delivery service was canceled. "This is so weird," she complained, scrolling through her phone with a frown. "It's like our whole digital life is falling apart." She blamed technology, the bank, anything but the source. The idea that Mark's financial river could ever run dry was as alien to her as the concept of living on a budget. Her father, Richard, had always provided. Now Mark provided. It was the natural order of her world. The men in her life were pillars, and her role was to be the beautiful statue they supported. She had never once considered that a pillar could choose to walk away. On day 10, her card was declined at a boutique where she was buying a dress for an upcoming charity gala. She called him, her voice tight with fury and humiliation. "Mark, what is going on? My card was just declined, in front of everyone. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was?" "I don't know, Sarah," he said, the picture of calm concern. "I'll have to call the bank. Maybe their systems are down." "Well, call them now," she snapped, "and transfer some money from savings. I need to buy this dress." "I'll handle it," he said, and then he hung up. He didn't call the bank. He didn't transfer any money. He sat at his desk in his real office, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, and stared at the framed photo of them on their wedding day. They both looked so young, so full of a hope he now realized was entirely his own. He had thought they were building a future together. She had thought she was securing a provider. He picked up a heavy, leather-bound portfolio from his desk. It was a new project, a philanthropic one. He was designing and funding the construction of a new community arts center in a low-income neighborhood. It was the kind of work that filled him with purpose, the kind of work he never discussed with Sarah or her family because they would have dismissed it as a waste of time and money. He traced the embossed logo of his firm on the cover, Stonehaven Architects. They thought he was just a glorified draftsman. They had no idea he was the stone, and this was his haven. The quiet empire he had built while they were busy mocking his sensible shoes. This portfolio, this work, was who he really was, and he was finally ready to introduce them to him. The next morning was day 11, the day she walked to his briefcase, took his emergency cash, and broke the final fragile thread that held his heart to hers. As she walked out the door, purse in hand, leaving for her rescheduled salon appointment, she paused and looked back at him. "Try to get our finances sorted out today, Mark," she said, her tone that of a patient but disappointed manager addressing a clumsy subordinate. "Daddy is coming over for dinner tonight with Mom. I don't want them to worry." He just nodded. Oh, they would worry. He would make sure of it. The quiet before the storm that evening was thick with unspoken things. Mark moved around the kitchen with a deliberate calm, preparing a simple roast chicken, the aroma of rosemary and garlic filling the house. It was a meal he knew Richard and Eleanor enjoyed, a small, final gesture of the man he used to be. He had set the dining room table with the good china, the one they only used for special occasions. It felt like he was setting a stage for the final act of a play. Sarah came downstairs radiant in a new dress. He assumed her mother had paid for it, and surveyed his work with a critical eye. "It looks nice, Mark," she allowed, a queen approving of a servant's efforts. "Are you sure that wine is good enough for Dad? You know how particular he is." "It's his favorite," Mark replied softly, not looking at her. He had remembered a passing comment Richard had made 2 years ago about a specific Bordeaux. It was the kind of detail he always stored away, another small effort to please, to belong. The doorbell rang at precisely 7 o'clock. Richard and Eleanor swept in, bringing a blast of cold air and entitlement with them. Richard was in a cashmere sweater, Eleanor draped in pearls and a scent that cost more than Mark's first car. "Mark, smells good," Richard boomed, handing his coat to Mark as if he were the butler. "Hope you're not serving that cheap swill you like." Eleanor kissed the air near Sarah's cheek. "Darling, you look lovely. Is Mark feeling better? You said on the phone he was having some trouble." Her eyes flicked towards Mark, filled with a cloying, insincere pity. "Everything is fine, Eleanor," Mark said, his voice even. "Dinner is almost ready." They sat down at the table, the crystal glasses gleaming under the chandelier. The conversation, as always, orbited around them. Richard's latest golf game, Eleanor's charity committee, a planned trip to Tuscany. Mark was a silent spectator, refilling wine glasses, passing dishes. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching a movie of his own life. The first crack in their perfect facade appeared during the main course. Richard, in the middle of a story about a business rival, was interrupted by his phone buzzing. He glanced at it, and a deep frown creased his brow. "What the devil?" he muttered. He tapped at the screen, his annoyance growing. "Sarah, is there a problem with the club membership?" Sarah looked confused. "No, why?" "I just got an email. It says our family membership has been suspended due to non-payment," Richard said, his gaze landing on Mark like a physical blow. "I thought you handled that, Mark. It comes out of your account, doesn't it?" Mark took a slow sip of his wine before answering. "It usually does, yes." His calm was a stark contrast to the sudden tension in the room. "Usually?" Eleanor repeated, her voice thin and sharp. "What does that mean?" "It means I'll have to look into it," Mark said, meeting Richard's glare without flinching. "There seems to be some sort of clerical error with the bank." "A clerical error?" Richard scoffed. "The payment is a month overdue, it says. A $20,000 annual fee doesn't just slip through the cracks because of a clerical error. What's going on, Mark? Are you in financial trouble?" The question was an accusation. It was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment their carefully constructed image of him as the bumbling but reliable provider would force them to confront a possibility they had never entertained, that he was not incompetent, but absent. Sarah jumped in, her voice high with anxiety, trying to smooth things over. "Daddy, I'm sure it's just a mix-up. Mark has been having a few issues with the accounts this week. He'll sort it out, right, Mark?" She looked at him, her eyes pleading, but also commanding. "Fix this. Make this ugliness go away." He looked at the three of them, their faces a portrait of arrogant concern. They weren't worried about him. They were worried about their comfort, their status, their membership at a club where they could look down on people not quite as rich as them. They were worried the golden goose had stopped laying. "Yes," Mark said, placing his napkin on the table. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a razor. "I will sort it out. In fact, I think we should sort it all out. Tonight." He stood up and walked towards the living room, where his worn leather briefcase sat by the armchair. He could feel their eyes on his back. The air was electric. The play was over. The trial was about to begin. He returned to the dining room and placed the briefcase on the table with a soft, definitive thud. The sound seemed to suck all the air out of the room. He didn't open it yet. He let it sit there, a silent, leather-bound witness. He looked at each of them in turn, his gaze lingering on Sarah, who was staring at the briefcase as if it were a bomb. "You asked if I was in financial trouble, Richard," Mark began, his voice calm and measured, the tone of a lecturer, not a victim. "It's a fair question. You've all been wondering, I can tell. The Netflix account, the meal delivery, Sarah's credit card, the club membership, it must all seem very confusing." "It seems incompetent," Richard snapped, his bravado returning. "It seems like you can't handle your own affairs." "Perhaps," Mark said with a small, sad smile. "Or perhaps the affairs you thought were mine were never really mine to begin with." He rested his hand on the briefcase. "For 7 years I've been a guest in this family. I've been good, reliable Mark, the practical one, the man who is good with numbers but not much else, the man who should be grateful that your daughter, a woman of her standing, agreed to marry him." Eleanor bristled. "There's no need to be dramatic, Mark. We have always treated you like a son." Mark let out a short, humorless laugh. "Like a son? Eleanor, you have never once asked me a single question about my work. Not a real question. You have no idea what I do. You think I'm an accountant of some kind. You once introduced me to your friends as a financial planner." "It's a perfectly respectable profession," she said stiffly. "It's not my profession," Mark replied. He turned his attention to Richard. "And you, Richard, you've treated me like an employee, a junior one at that. You clap me on the back and call me son, but you talk down to me. You mock my background, and you've never, not once, shown me an ounce of genuine respect as an equal. You see me as a walking, talking wallet for your daughter and a convenient source of free labor for your son." Richard's face was turning a dangerous shade of purple. "Now you listen to me," he started, rising from his chair. "No," Mark said, and the single word, spoken without volume but with immense weight, stopped Richard in his tracks. "No, Richard. For 7 years I have listened. Tonight, you will listen." His gaze finally settled on his wife. Sarah was pale, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. She was realizing this was not a problem to be managed. This was a reckoning. "And you, Sarah," he said, his voice softening with a deep, profound sorrow. "I have loved you. I truly have. But I have finally accepted that you were never in love with me. You were in love with the security I provided. You've stood by and watched your parents belittle me. You've allowed your brother to take advantage of me. And you have never, not once, stood up and said, 'He is my husband. He is my partner. You will respect him.' Instead, you've told me not to rock the boat, because the boat was a luxury yacht, and you were terrified of having to swim." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. The silence was absolute, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. "This morning," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "you took $300 from my wallet without asking. You did it while on the phone with your mother, complaining about my incompetence. You didn't see a husband you were stealing from. You saw a faulty ATM. And that's when I knew. The boat had already sunk. I was just the last one to realize I was drowning." With that, he unlatched the 2 brass clasps on the briefcase. The sound echoed in the silent room. He opened it, revealing not a mess of papers, but a series of neatly organized, leather-bound folders. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from tense to funereal. The arrogance had evaporated from Richard and Eleanor's faces, replaced by a wary, confused apprehension. Sarah looked like she was about to be sick. Mark was no longer their bumbling provider. He was an unknown quantity, and it terrified them. He took out the first document. It was a simple deed. He slid it across the polished mahogany table towards Richard. "You've always loved this house, Richard. You've mentioned many times how you helped Sarah pick it out, how you advised her on the investment. You told me it was a good starter home for us." Richard picked up the document, his hands trembling slightly. He read it. His eyes widened, first in disbelief, then in shock. This can't be right," he stammered. "This deed is dated 3 months before the wedding. It's only in your name." It says you paid cash. That's correct, Mark said. I bought this house outright with the first major bonus from my little side hustle. I put it in both our names after we got married, as a wedding gift to my wife, a gift that was never acknowledged. Last week, using the power of attorney Sarah signed when we were arranging our estate plan, the one she never bothered to read, I had her name removed. This house, Richard, is mine. It has always been mine. He let that sink in before pulling out the next folder. He opened it and fanned out a series of glossy architectural renderings and financial projections. He pushed them outdoors. Eleanor, you've been so excited about the new wing of the museum you're on the board of. The gala next month is the big fundraising kickoff, isn't it? She nodded, confused. Yes, our lead donor has been incredibly generous. The lead donor is an anonymous LLC, Mark said. He tapped a document, a certificate of incorporation. The Stonehaven Philanthropic Fund. The fund is the sole owner of my company, Stonehaven Architects. The company, Eleanor, that designed the new wing. Pro bono. And the fund, my fund, is the anonymous donor who has pledged $10 million to its construction. A pledge that, as of this morning, has been officially withdrawn. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her pearls. The color drained from her face. She looked at the plans, then at Mark, as if seeing him for the first time. The practical man with the dependable skill was the architect of her greatest social triumph and its potential destroyer. Finally, he turned back to Richard. He pulled out a thick, bound volume. It was a corporate portfolio. Richard, he said, his voice devoid of all malice, a simple statement of fact. Your company, Sterling Imports, has been struggling for the last few years. You've been propped up by a series of loans from a very patient investment group that bought up your debt. Richard's face had gone from purple to a waxy gray. He knew what was coming. That investment group, a subsidiary of my own holding company, now owns 60% of your voting shares. As of the board meeting tomorrow morning, at which I will be in attendance, I will be voting to have you removed as CEO and replaced with a management team that can actually turn a profit. You see, your condescension wasn't just insulting, it was bad business. You never bothered to learn anything about the man who was quietly becoming your boss. He saved the last document for Sarah. It wasn't a deed or a corporate file. It was a simple bank statement for his personal account, the one she had never seen, the one she had no access to. He laid it in front of her. The final balance at the bottom of the page had 8 figures. 8 figures followed by a comma and 2 more numbers. Her eyes scanned the number, but her brain refused to process it. It was an impossible sum, a reality she could not reconcile with the man she thought she knew, the man she had just called in over his head. It's not just money, Sarah, he said, echoing her own words back to her. It's never just money. It's a measure. It's a measure of time, of effort, of sleepless nights, of risks taken. It's a measure of a life. And for 7 years, you and your family have treated my life, my work, as your personal expense account. You never respected the work, so you could never respect the man who did it. He stood up, the quiet finality of his movement a judgment in itself. The experiment is over. The joint accounts are nearly empty. The life you thought you had is gone. This house is mine. The cars, which are leased in my company's name, will be returned tomorrow. Your allowance, he said the word with surgical precision, has been discontinued. He looked at his wife, the woman he had once loved more than his own ambition, and felt only a vast, aching emptiness. Welcome to day 1. The silence that followed his declaration was a physical entity. It was heavier than the antique furniture, more oppressive than the humidity of a summer storm. Richard, the titan of industry, the master of his universe, had collapsed into his dining chair. He looked like a puppet with its strings cut, his face slack with a mixture of terror and utter disbelief. He kept picking up the deed to the house, reading it, and putting it down. as if the words might change if he stared at them long enough. Eleanor was frozen, her hands still at her throat, clutching her pearls like a rosary. Her entire social standing, her identity as a leading philanthropist, was built on a foundation she now realized was controlled by the man she had dismissed as a simpleton. Her world, a carefully curated gallery of appearances, had just been declared a forgery. But it was Sarah's reaction that held Mark's attention. She hadn't moved. Her eyes were still fixed on the bank statement, on the impossible number. Tears were streaming down her face, silent and steady. But Mark, watching her with the cold clarity of a surgeon, knew they were not tears of remorse. They were tears of loss. She was not mourning the death of their love, but the death of her lifestyle. She was a princess who had just discovered her castle was made of sand, and the tide was coming in. Finally, she looked up at him, her beautiful face streaked with mascara, her expression one of utter bewilderment. "Mark, why?" she whispered, the question a fragile thread in the suffocating silence. "Why would you do this to us?" The us was telling. Even now, she saw herself as part of her family, and him as the outside force that had attacked them. "I didn't do this to you, Sarah," he said, his voice tired but firm. "I just stopped preventing you from doing it to yourselves. I stopped being the dam that held back the consequences of your own actions. I took away the safety net you never even knew was there, the one you never thanked me for." Richard finally found his voice. It was a hoarse, strangled thing, stripped of its usual booming authority. "This is insane. It's monstrous. After everything we've done for you, we welcomed you into our family." Mark turned his cool gaze on his father-in-law. "You welcomed my bank account into your family, Richard. You saw a willing workhorse and you saddled him up. Don't talk to me about what you've done for me. I've paid for every dinner, every vacation, every family expense for 7 years. I funded your son's failed startups. I paid for his cars. I designed his house. What exactly have you done for me, other than insult my background and belittle my work?" He didn't wait for an answer. He walked back to the table and began to methodically pack his briefcase. Each document was placed back in its folder with care. The deed, the corporate portfolio, the philanthropic pledge, the bank statement. He was packing away his old life, closing the case on the man he had pretended to be for their comfort. As he snapped the latches shut, the sound jolted Eleanor into action. Her survival instincts, honed by years of navigating the treacherous waters of high society, took over. The shock wore off, replaced by a desperate, fawning pragmatism. "Mark," she said, her voice suddenly sweet, dripping with a sincerity that was nauseatingly false. "Perhaps we've been hasty. We haven't always appreciated you, it's true. Your father and I, we're from a different generation. But we can change. We see you now, Mark. We truly see you." He paused, his back to them, and for a fleeting second, Sarah felt a surge of hope. But when he turned around, his eyes were empty of all emotion. "You see my bank balance, Eleanor. That's all. If I had revealed that I was bankrupt tonight, you'd be calling me a failure and advising your daughter to hire the best divorce lawyer in the city. Your respect is as shallow as your charity. It's transactional." Just then the doorbell rang again. The sound was sharp, decisive. Everyone flinched, except for Mark. He walked to the door and opened it. Standing on the porch was a tall, impeccably dressed man in his 50s, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "James," Mark said, stepping aside to let him in. "Thank you for coming." "Of course, Mark. I wouldn't miss it," the man said, his eyes sweeping over the scene in the dining room with a practiced, analytical gaze. He was James Peterson, Mark's lawyer, mentor, and the closest thing he had to a father. James had been the one who had advised him on how to structure his companies, how to protect his assets, and for the past month, how to orchestrate this very night. He was the unexpected ally, the validation of Mark's reality. The arrival of James Peterson shifted the power dynamic completely. Richard and Eleanor knew who he was. James was one of the most respected corporate lawyers in the state. His presence lent an official, irreversible gravity to the situation. This was no longer just a messy family argument. This was a legal proceeding. James placed a gentle hand on Mark's shoulder. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and full of genuine concern. "I am now," Mark replied. James nodded, then turned his attention to the three stunned figures at the table. He addressed Sarah directly, his tone professional but not unkind. "Sarah," he said, "Mark has asked me to be here tonight to facilitate the next steps. He is prepared to be very generous in a separation agreement, far more generous than the law would require, given the circumstances and the prenuptial agreement you both signed." The words prenuptial agreement landed like another grenade in the devastated room. Sarah looked at Mark, her expression one of betrayal. "A prenup? You made me sign a prenup?" "We both signed one, Sarah," Mark corrected her gently. "James drafted it. It stipulated that what was mine before the marriage remained mine, and what was yours remained yours. It was to protect both of us. You just didn't bother to read it because your father's lawyer said it was standard." Richard, who had clearly given that exact advice, sank even lower in his chair. He had been outmaneuvered from the very beginning. "Mark is vacating the premises tonight," James continued. "He has arranged for a hotel for you for the next 30 days, to give you time to make other arrangements. A car will be here in the morning to take you wherever you need to go. He has also deposited a sum of $50,000 into a new account in your name as a transitional fund." It was a severance package. He was being laid off from the job of being Mark's wife. The cruelty of the generosity was staggering. He was cutting her off, but he was doing it so reasonably, so responsibly, that it left no room for argument. He was treating their divorce like a business dissolution. Sarah finally broke. The tears of loss turned into sobs of desperation. She stood up, knocking her chair over, and rushed to Mark. She grabbed his arms, her grip surprisingly strong. "No, Mark, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Don't do this. I love you. I'm so sorry. I was blind. I was stupid. Please just give me another chance. We can fix this. I can fix this." He looked down at her, at the woman clinging to him, and for the first time that night, he felt a flicker of the old pain, the old love. This was the woman he had dreamed of, the woman he had promised to cherish. But as he looked into her tear-filled eyes, he saw the same thing he had seen for years: fear. She was terrified of losing her world, not of losing him. Her apology was a desperate plea for reinstatement, not a genuine act of contrition. "I believe that you're sorry, Sarah," he said, his voice gentle as he carefully detached her hands from his arms. "I believe you're sorry this has happened, but you're not sorry for what you did, because until an hour ago, you didn't even know you were doing it. You can't fix something if you don't understand what's broken." He turned to her parents. "I suggest you leave. There's nothing more to be said." Richard, a man accustomed to having the last word, opened his mouth to protest, but one look from James Peterson silenced him. Defeated, he and Eleanor gathered their things and shuffled out of the house that was no longer their daughter's, their faces a mask of humiliation. Sarah stood alone in the middle of the room, looking small and lost. "Where will you go?" she whispered. "Home," Mark said. It was a simple word, but it was devastating. This house, their house, had never been his home. It had been a stage. He picked up his briefcase. James was waiting by the door. "Goodbye, Sarah," he said, and then he walked out of the house, out of the play and into his own life, leaving the stage and its lead actress to the gathering darkness. The 3 months that followed were a study in consequences. For Richard and Eleanor, the fallout was swift and brutal. The news of Richard's ousting as CEO of Sterling Imports sent shockwaves through their social circle. The official story was that he was retiring to pursue other interests. But the truth, as it always does, seeped out in whispers at cocktail parties and on the golf course. He was no longer a captain of industry. He was a cautionary tale. Their invitations dwindled. The fawning friends who had once hung on his every word now avoided his calls. They were social lepers, a stark reminder that in their world, status was everything, and they no longer had it. Eleanor's humiliation was more public. When the museum board announced that their anonymous lead donor had withdrawn funding, citing a change in philanthropic focus, her position as chair of the gala committee became untenable. She was quietly asked to step down. The shame was a constant, bitter companion. They had built their lives on a mountain of arrogance, and Mark had simply kicked away the stone that held it all up. Their poetic justice was not that they lost their money, but that they lost the respect and admiration they had craved, the very things they had so freely denied Mark. They were forced to see themselves as others now saw them, not as elites, but as failures. For Sarah, the transition was far more jarring. She moved out of the grand house and into a small, sterile apartment her transitional fund barely covered for a few months. The luxury SUV was repossessed. The credit cards were canceled. For the first time in her life, she had to look at price tags. She had to learn to budget, to cook, to clean. The friends she had spent her days with, the ones who filled her social calendar with lunches and shopping trips, slowly faded away. Her problems, her real existential problems, were boring and distasteful to them. They were a reminder of a precarity they didn't want to acknowledge. She was forced to get a job. She had a degree in art history, something she had pursued as a hobby, not a career. She ended up working as a gallery assistant, earning a modest salary that barely covered her rent. The work was humbling. She was no longer a patron of the arts. She was the one fetching coffee for the patrons. Stripped of her wealth, her status, and her social circle, Sarah was left with nothing but herself. And for the first time, she was forced to take a long, hard look at the person she was. The days were filled with a gnawing loneliness, a quiet she couldn't fill with shopping or gossip. In that silence, her husband's words echoed, "You can't fix something if you don't understand what's broken." She began to see it, her entitlement, her casual cruelty, her profound selfishness. She remembered all the times he had tried to talk to her about his work, his passions, and how she had changed the subject to something she found more interesting, like a new handbag or a vacation plan. She recalled every dismissive shrug, every placating smile that was really a betrayal. The shame, when it came, was a physical force, a weight that settled deep in her bones. It wasn't shame for what she had lost, but for who she had been. Meanwhile, Mark was not just surviving, he was thriving. He moved into a stunning penthouse apartment in a building he had designed, a space filled with light, clean lines, and a sense of peace he had never known. He threw himself into his work, not as a means to an end, but for the pure joy of creation. Stonehaven Architects became a name synonymous with innovation and integrity. He finalized the funding for the Community Arts Center himself, dedicating it to his late mother, a woman who had taught him the value of hard work and quiet dignity. He traveled. He reconnected with old friends. He learned to laugh again, a full, genuine sound that came from his soul. He was free, free from the constant need for approval, free from the weight of their expectations, free from the exhausting performance of being good, reliable Mark. He was just Mark, and it was more than enough. He never spoke ill of Sarah or her family. When colleagues or friends asked about the divorce, he would simply say, "We wanted different things from life." There was no vindictiveness in him, no desire for petty revenge. His actions that night had not been about punishment. They had been about liberation. He had not sought to destroy them, but to save himself. His victory was not in their downfall, but in his own quiet, dignified ascent. He found a new rhythm to his life, one built on purpose and authenticity rather than obligation. He had breakfast at a small cafe every morning, where the owner knew his name and his order. He took long walks by the river in the evenings. He was building a new life, not on the foundation of wealth, but on the solid bedrock of self-respect. His true fortune was not the number on his bank statement, but the peace he felt when he closed his eyes at night. It was a wealth Sarah and her family, for all their money, had never known. 6 months after that fateful night, Mark was reviewing blueprints in his office when his assistant buzzed him. "Mark, there's a Sarah Jennings here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment." The use of her maiden name sent a small jolt through him. He paused for a moment, then said, "Send her in." Sarah walked into his office, and he was struck by how different she looked. She was thinner, and the expensive clothes had been replaced by a simple dress that was tasteful but not luxurious. The biggest change was in her eyes. The old arrogance, the bored entitlement, was gone. In its place was a hesitant, fragile humility. She looked around his office at the awards on the wall, the models of his buildings, the sprawling view of the city. "This is who you are," she said softly, a statement of discovery. "I never knew." "You never asked," he replied, not unkindly. He gestured to a chair. She sat, perching on the edge as if she didn't deserve to take up space. "I'm not here to ask for anything, Mark," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "Not for money, not for another chance. I wanted to apologize for everything." She looked him directly in the eye, and for the first time he saw genuine remorse there. "You were right. About all of it. I was a terrible wife. I was a shallow, selfish person. I didn't love you. I don't think I knew how. I loved what you gave me, and I took you for granted in the most profound way possible. I am so, so sorry for the pain I caused you, and for the years of your life I wasted." The apology was simple, unadorned with excuses. It was the first truly honest thing she had ever said to him. He listened, his expression unreadable. He had imagined this conversation 100 times, and in his imagination, he had always felt a sense of triumph. But sitting here, looking at this changed woman, he felt only a quiet, melancholic peace. "Thank you for saying that, Sarah," he said. "It means something to hear it." "I've been working," she continued, a faint, wry smile touching her lips, "at a gallery. It's not glamorous, but it's mine. I pay my own rent. I'm learning how to be a person, not just a princess. I wanted you to know that the lesson, as hard as it was, wasn't wasted." They sat in silence for a moment, the vast space between them filled not with anger, but with the ghosts of what might have been. He saw the potential for her redemption, a path she would have to walk alone. His justice had not been to ruin her, but to give her the opportunity to find a strength she never knew she possessed. "I'm happy for you, Sarah," he said, and he meant it. "I hope you find what you're looking for." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She stood up, her composure intact. "Well," she said, her voice a little thick, "that's all I came to say. Goodbye, Mark, and thank you. In a strange way, thank you for setting me free, too." She turned and walked out of his office, her back straight, her steps sure. He watched her go, a chapter of his life closing quietly, without drama or fanfare. The resolution wasn't a storybook ending where they found their way back to each other. It was something more real, more mature. It was an acknowledgement of a shared past and the acceptance of separate futures. He had not just reclaimed his wealth, he had reclaimed his life. And in doing so, he had inadvertently given Sarah the chance to find her own. True strength, he realized, wasn't about how much you could provide, but how much dignity you could maintain when you were treated as if you had none. And true justice wasn't about revenge, but about balance. He had rebalanced the scales, not just for himself, but for everyone involved. The world was right again. He turned back to his window, looking out at the city he helped to build, a city of endless possibilities. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. It was the end of a day and the beginning of a beautiful, peaceful evening. He was finally home. What would you have done in Mark's position? Would you have been as patient, or would you have confronted them sooner? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Sometimes the longest road leads to the most satisfying destination, and reminding those who take us for granted of our true worth is a journey worth taking. If you found this story of quiet strength and deserved vindication meaningful, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us of the incredible power of integrity. Thank you for watching, and remember, no matter what, never let anyone else write the story of your value. You are the architect of your own life. Build it well.